Jake Thornton sat in his luxurious office at the top of the TechSphere building, surrounded by state-of-the-art technology and a panoramic view of the city below. His eyes were fixed on the security monitors, watching the frantic routine of his employees as they rushed through their day. Despite being the mastermind behind one of the world's most successful tech companies, Jake felt an increasing sense of disconnection from the reality his workers faced. As he observed the bustling activity on the lower floors, Jake couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his calm, isolated workspace and the hectic environment below. He saw employees hurrying to meetings, grabbing quick lunches at their desks, and working tirelessly to meet deadlines. The sight made him uncomfortable, reminding him of the growing divide between his life of privilege and the daily struggles of his workforce. Jake's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door. It was Frank, his longtime mentor and confidant. Frank had been with Jake since the early days of TechSphere, offering guidance and occasionally challenging Jake's perspective on business and life. "Got a minute?" Frank asked, entering the office without waiting for a response. Jake nodded, gesturing for Frank to take a seat. "What's on your mind?" Frank settled into the chair across from Jake's desk, his expression serious. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something, Jake. It's about the company culture and your role in it." Jake leaned back in his chair, bracing himself for what he suspected would be a critical conversation. Frank had never been one to mince words. "You've built an incredible company, Jake," Frank began. "But I can't help but notice a growing disconnect between you and the people who work for you. When was the last time you actually spoke with someone from the lower levels of the company?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but realized he couldn't remember. Frank continued, "The problem with success, especially the kind you've achieved, is that it creates a bubble. You're surrounded by yes men and isolated from the realities of everyday life. It's making you lose touch with what's happening on the ground." Frank's words stung, but Jake knew there was truth in them. He had been feeling increasingly isolated, even as his wealth and influence grew. "What do you suggest?" Jake asked, his voice quieter than usual. Frank leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You need to understand the life of your average employee, not just intellectually, but experientially. You need to step out of your comfort zone and see the world from their perspective." As Frank's words sank in, Jake felt a mixture of defensiveness and curiosity. He had always prided himself on being an innovative leader, but had he become complacent? Had his success blinded him to the realities faced by his employees and the wider world? After Frank left, Jake spent hours contemplating their conversation. He paced his office, staring out at the city below, feeling a growing sense of determination. He needed to do something drastic, something that would shake him out of his complacency and give him a true understanding of life outside his privileged bubble. That's when the idea struck him. What if he could experience life as an ordinary employee at TechSphere? What if he could work alongside his staff, facing the same challenges and pressures they did every day? The more Jake thought about it, the more convinced he became that this was the right course of action. He would disguise himself as an intern, starting from the bottom and working his way up. It would be a risk, both personally and professionally, but it felt necessary. Jake spent the next few days meticulously planning his disguise. He grew out his beard, ditched his designer clothes for off-the-rack items, and practiced speaking without the authority he had grown accustomed to. He created a new identity, Jake Thompson, a young, enthusiastic tech graduate eager to make his mark in the industry. As he prepared to step into this new role, Jake felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was about to enter a world he had long ignored, a world of daily commutes, budget constraints, and workplace hierarchies. It was a far cry from the life he had known, but he was determined to see it through. On the morning of his first day as an intern, Jake stood in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing himself. Gone was the confident CEO in tailored suits. In his place stood a nervous-looking young man in khakis and a button-down shirt, ready to face the challenges of an entry-level position. With a deep breath, Jake left his penthouse and headed for the subway, stepping into a new chapter of his life. He was about to learn firsthand what it meant to be an ordinary employee at TechSphere, and he had no idea how this experience would change him. Jake, now disguised as a fresh-faced intern, stepped into the bustling lobby of TechSphere. The familiar space felt entirely different from this new perspective. Instead of being greeted by deferential nods and immediate attention, he blended into the crowd of employees rushing to start their day. He approached the reception desk, his heart racing. "Hi, I'm Jake Thompson. It's my first day as an intern," he said, surprised by the nervousness in his voice. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer. "Take the elevator to the 12th floor. Someone from HR will meet you there." Jake made his way to the elevator, squeezing in with a group of employees engrossed in their phones or engaged in hurried conversations about deadlines and project updates. He felt invisible, a stark contrast to his usual commanding presence. On the 12th floor, he was greeted by Mia Sanders, a young woman with a determined expression and a no-nonsense attitude. "You must be Jake," she said, giving him a quick once-over. "I'm Mia. I'll be showing you around today." As they walked through the office, Mia provided a rapid-fire overview of the company's structure and culture. Jake listened intently, trying to see his own creation through fresh eyes. "And here's where you'll be working," Mia said, gesturing to a small cubicle. "It's not much, but it's home for the next few months." Jake stared at the cramped space, a far cry from his expansive corner office. "It's great," he managed, trying to sound enthusiastic. Mia raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical of his sincerity. "Look, Jake, I'll be straight with you. We get a lot of interns who think they're going to waltz in here and become the next tech billionaire overnight. If that's your attitude, you're in for a rude awakening." Jake was taken aback by her bluntness. "No, that's not—" "Save it," Mia cut him off. "Actions speak louder than words. If you're here to learn and contribute, great. If not, you're wasting everyone's time, including your own." As Mia walked away, Jake felt a mix of admiration for her directness and discomfort at being on the receiving end of such criticism. He settled into his cubicle, trying to make sense of the outdated computer and the stack of orientation materials. Throughout the day, Jake struggled to adapt to his new role. Simple tasks that he would have delegated in the past now consumed hours of his time. He fumbled with the copy machine, got lost trying to find the break room, and felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of emails flooding his inbox. During lunch, he sat alone in the crowded cafeteria, observing the social dynamics around him. He overheard conversations about tight budgets, long hours, and the stress of meeting impossible deadlines. It was a side of his company he had never truly seen before. In the afternoon, Jake attended a department meeting where Mia presented her ideas for a digital inclusion project. He watched as she passionately argued for allocating resources to develop affordable technology for underserved communities. "We have an opportunity to make a real difference," Mia said, her eyes blazing with conviction. "But instead, we're focusing on products that only the elite can afford. We're widening the digital divide instead of bridging it." Jake felt a pang of guilt as he realized how much truth there was in Mia's words. He had always seen TechSphere as an innovator, but had they lost sight of their responsibility to society as a whole? As the meeting progressed, Jake noticed how Mia's ideas were dismissed or downplayed by senior managers. They cited budget constraints and market demands, arguments Jake himself had used in the past. Now, seeing the frustration on Mia's face, he began to question the wisdom of those decisions. After the meeting, Jake approached Mia. "That was a great presentation," he said. "I think your ideas have a lot of merit." Mia looked surprised, then suspicious. "Thanks, but flattery won't get you far here. If you really believe in the project, prove it by contributing." As she walked away, Jake felt a newfound determination. He realized that this experience wasn't just about understanding his employees' lives. It was about reevaluating the very purpose of his company. That evening, as Jake left the office with the rest of the staff, he felt physically and mentally exhausted. The day had been a whirlwind of new experiences and challenging realizations. As he joined the crowded subway car for his commute home, he reflected on how much he had taken for granted. Jake's first day as an intern had opened his eyes to a world he had been disconnected from for too long. He realized that this journey would be more difficult and more transformative than he had anticipated. As he looked around at the tired faces of his fellow commuters, Jake knew that his perspective was already beginning to shift. The question now was, how would this new understanding change him? And what would it mean for the future of TechSphere? As weeks passed, Jake found himself increasingly immersed in his role as an intern at TechSphere. His days were filled with a mix of mundane tasks and eye-opening experiences that continued to challenge his preconceptions about his company and its impact on society. One morning, Mia approached Jake's cubicle. "We're short on volunteers for the community outreach program this weekend," she said. "Are you interested in helping out?" Jake nodded, eager to see another side of TechSphere's operations. "Absolutely. What does it involve?" "We'll be teaching basic computer skills to kids in underprivileged neighborhoods," Mia explained. "It's part of our digital literacy initiative." That Saturday, Jake found himself in a rundown community center, surrounded by excited children eager to learn. As he helped a young girl navigate a word processing program, he was struck by how something he took for granted could be so transformative for others. "This is amazing," the girl exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder as she typed her name on the screen. Jake felt a lump in his throat. "Yeah, it really is," he agreed, seeing the power of technology through new eyes. During a break, Jake overheard a conversation between Mia and a single mother who had brought her children to the class. "These classes are a lifeline for us," the woman said, her voice filled with emotion. "Without basic computer skills, my kids would fall behind in school. But I can't afford a computer at home, let alone internet access." Jake listened intently, realizing the real-world impact of the digital divide that Mia had been so passionate about addressing. He thought about the millions of dollars TechSphere spent on developing luxury gadgets, while families like this struggle to access basic technology. As they packed up at the end of the day, Mia noticed Jake's pensive mood. "It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?" she said. Jake nodded. "I had no idea how much of a difference something as simple as computer access could make." Mia's expression softened slightly. "That's why I push so hard for these initiatives at work. It's not just about innovation, it's about accessibility." Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into helping Mia with her digital inclusion project. He used his coding skills to develop a prototype for a low-cost, user-friendly platform that could bring internet access to underserved communities. As they worked late one evening, Mia opened up about her background. "My grandmother was a civil rights activist," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "She taught me that true progress means lifting everyone up, not just a select few." Jake felt a mix of admiration and shame. "She sounds like an incredible woman," he said. "I wish I had that kind of purpose growing up." Mia looked at him curiously. "What was your childhood like?" Jake hesitated, aware of the need to maintain his cover story. "Pretty ordinary, I guess. Middle-class family, decent schools, nothing like what we saw at the community center." Mia nodded, a hint of suspicion in her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if the higher-ups in this company have any idea what life is like for most people. They seem so disconnected from reality." Jake felt a pang of guilt, knowing he was one of those disconnected higher-ups. "Maybe they just need someone to show them," he suggested cautiously. As they continued to work together, Jake found himself growing closer to Mia. He admired her passion, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to making a difference. At the same time, he felt increasingly conflicted about his deception. One afternoon, as they presented their progress on the digital inclusion project to a group of middle managers, Jake watched Mia masterfully argue for increased funding and support. He felt a surge of pride, mixed with a growing realization that his feelings for her were deepening beyond mere admiration. However, the managers remained skeptical. "It's a nice idea," one of them said dismissively, "but we need to focus on projects with a clear ROI. We're not a charity." Jake saw the frustration and disappointment on Mia's face. In that moment, he wanted nothing more than to reveal his true identity and override their decision. But he held back, knowing that doing so would destroy the trust he had built with Mia and negate everything he had learned. As they left the meeting room, Mia's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't know why I keep trying," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Nothing ever changes." Without thinking, Jake put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't give up," he said firmly. "What you're doing matters. We'll find a way to make them see that." Mia looked at him, a mix of gratitude and curiosity in her eyes. "Why do you care so much about this, Jake? Most interns are just looking to pad their resumes." Jake swallowed hard, knowing he was treading dangerous ground. "I guess I've realized there's more to life than just climbing the corporate ladder," he said carefully. "You've shown me that." As they stood there, Jake felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him. He was torn between his growing feelings for Mia and the knowledge that their relationship was built on a lie. He knew that eventually he would have to reveal the truth. But for now, he was determined to use his position and knowledge to support Mia's vision and make a real difference in the lives of those who needed it most. The challenge ahead was daunting, but for the first time in years, Jake felt truly alive and purposeful. He just hoped that when the truth finally came out, Mia would understand why he had chosen this path. As Jake and Mia continued to work closely on the digital inclusion project, their bond grew stronger. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of battling corporate red tape, Mia invited Jake to grab a coffee at a small cafe near the office. The cafe was a cozy, dimly lit space, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of TechSphere. As they settled into a quiet corner booth, Jake noticed Mia's demeanor change. She seemed more relaxed, less guarded than she was at work. "You know," Mia began, stirring her coffee absently, "I never told you why I'm so passionate about this project." Jake leaned forward, genuinely interested. "I'd love to hear about it." Mia took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for a story she didn't often share. "It all goes back to my grandmother Rosa. She was a civil rights activist in the 60s and 70s. She fought for equality in education, housing, you name it." Jake listened intently as Mia's eyes lit up with admiration for her grandmother. "Rosa grew up in a time when access to information was limited, especially for people of color," Mia continued. "She always said that knowledge was power, and that denying people access to information was a form of oppression." Mia pulled out her phone and showed Jake a black and white photo of a fiery-looking woman standing at a podium, her fist raised in the air. "That's her, giving a speech at a rally for equal education rights." Jake studied the image, struck by the resemblance between Rosa and Mia. "I can see where you get your fighting spirit," he said softly. Mia smiled, a mixture of pride and sadness in her eyes. "Rosa passed away when I was in college, but her last words to me were, 'Mia, the fight isn't over. It's just changed battlegrounds.' And she was right. Today, the digital divide is creating the same kind of inequality she fought against." Jake felt a lump in his throat, moved by Mia's story and the weight of responsibility she carried. "That's why you push so hard at TechSphere," he said, understanding dawning on him. Mia nodded. "Exactly. Rosa taught me that change doesn't come easy. You have to fight for it, even when it seems hopeless." That's why I can't give up on this project, no matter how many times we get shut down." As Mia spoke, Jake felt a growing sense of shame. He thought about the countless times he had dismissed similar initiatives in the past, always prioritizing profit over social impact. He had never considered the real-world consequences of those decisions. "Your grandmother would be proud of you, Mia," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. Mia looked at him, her expression softening. "Thanks, Jake. You know, when you first started, I thought you were just another tech bro looking to make a quick buck, but you've really proven me wrong." Jake felt a pang of guilt at her words, knowing that his true identity remained hidden. But he pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on how he could use his position to support Mia's vision. "I want to help make this project a reality," Jake said firmly. "What if we used my coding skills to develop a prototype? Something we could present to the board that shows the real potential of this idea." Mia's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant, Jake. If we can show them a working model, it might be harder for them to dismiss it." Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into the work. He spent long nights coding, drawing on all his experience to create a user-friendly platform that could bring internet access and digital literacy tools to underserved communities. As they worked side by side, Jake found himself increasingly drawn to Mia. Her passion, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to her cause were unlike anything he had encountered in his privileged world. He admired her in a way he had never admired anyone before. One night, as they were putting the finishing touches on their prototype, Mia turned to Jake with a serious expression. "You know, this project means everything to me. It's not just about honoring my grandmother's memory. It's about making a real difference in people's lives." Jake nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I get it, Mia, and I promise you, we're going to make this happen." As he spoke, Jake realized he meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. He was no longer just playing a role or trying to understand his employees better. He was fully committed to seeing this project through, no matter what it took. But as their eyes met, Jake also realized something else. His feelings for Mia had grown far beyond admiration or friendship. He was falling in love with her, and the thought both exhilarated and terrified him, because Jake knew that eventually he would have to reveal his true identity. And when that moment came, he might lose not only Mia's trust, but also any chance of a future with her. The weight of his secret hung heavy between them, an invisible barrier that Jake longed to break down, but didn't know how. As they returned to their work, Jake silently vowed to find a way to make things right. He would see Mia's project succeed, and somehow, he would find a way to tell her the truth without destroying everything they had built together. As Jake continued his double life at TechSphere, the weight of his deception began to take its toll. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, afraid that someone might recognize him despite his disguise. The stress of maintaining his false identity while growing closer to Mia and becoming more invested in her project was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. One evening, as Jake was leaving the office, he received a text from Frank, his mentor. "Meet me at the usual place. We need to talk." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't spoken to Frank since starting this undercover experiment, and he wondered if his absence had raised suspicions. He made his way to a discreet bar where they often met to discuss business away from prying eyes. Frank was already there when Jake arrived, nursing a glass of scotch. He looked up as Jake approached, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jake's altered appearance. "So, this is what you've been up to," Frank said, gesturing for Jake to sit. "I have to admit, I'm impressed by your commitment. But I have to ask, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his now unkempt hair. "I'm trying to understand, Frank, to see the company from a different perspective, and I've learned so much. There's this project." Frank held up a hand, cutting him off. "Before you go on, I need you to answer one question honestly. Are you doing this because you genuinely want to change? Or are you just looking for a way to escape the pressures of your real life? The question hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing he wasn't sure of the answer himself. Frank leaned forward, his expression serious. Jake, I've known you for a long time. I've seen you build this company from the ground up, but I've also seen you become more and more isolated, more disconnected from the realities of the world around you. This little experiment of yours, it's not just about understanding your employees, is it? Jake slumped in his chair, feeling the weight of Frank's words. No, he admitted quietly. It's not. There's this woman, Mia. She's passionate about using technology to bridge the digital divide, to help underserved communities. And working with her, seeing the world through her eyes, it's changing me, Frank. Frank nodded slowly, taking a sip of his drink. And how do you think she'll react when she finds out who you really are? Jake winced at the question. I don't know, he said honestly. I'm afraid I'll lose her trust, lose everything we've built together. You mean everything you've built on a lie? Frank corrected gently. Jake felt a surge of defensiveness. It may have started as a lie, but my feelings for her, my commitment to her project, that's real. Frank sighed, looking at Jake with a mixture of concern and disappointment. Jake, you're playing a dangerous game here. You have real power, real influence. If you truly believe in this project, in this woman, why not use that power openly? Jake shook his head. You don't understand. If I reveal who I am now, Mia will never trust me again. She'll think everything was just a game to me. And the longer you wait, the worse it will be, Frank countered. You need to decide what you really want, Jake. Do you want to be the man you've always been, or do you want to become someone new? Because you can't have it both ways. As Jake left the bar later that night, Frank's words echoed in his mind. He found himself standing at a crossroads, torn between the life he had always known and the new world he had discovered. On one side was his identity as Jake Thornton, the billionaire CEO, with all the power and influence that came with it. On the other was the possibility of a life with Mia, fighting for a cause he had come to believe in, but built on a foundation of deception. As he walked through the city streets, blending in with the crowd in a way he never had before, Jake realized that Frank was right. He couldn't continue living this double life indefinitely. Sooner or later, he would have to make a choice. But as he thought about Mia, about the passion in her eyes when she talked about her project, about the way she had opened his eyes to a world he had never truly seen before, Jake knew that he wasn't ready to give that up. Not yet. He made a decision then, standing on a busy street corner as the city bustled around him. He would see this through. He would help Mia bring her project to fruition, using all the skills and knowledge at his disposal. And then, when the time was right, he would tell her the truth and face the consequences, whatever they might be. As Jake headed home, he felt a mix of determination and fear. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with moral dilemmas and the constant threat of discovery. But for the first time in years, he also felt alive, driven by a purpose greater than himself. The question now was, could he become the man he wanted to be without destroying everything he had built, both as Jake Thornton and as the intern Jake Thompson? Only time would tell. Weeks passed, and the day of the big company presentation arrived. Jake and Mia had been working tirelessly on their digital inclusion project, refining the prototype and preparing their pitch. The entire future of the initiative hung on this moment. As they set up in the conference room, Jake could feel the tension radiating from Mia. "Hey," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We've got this. The project speaks for itself." Mia gave him a tight smile. "I hope you're right. There's so much riding on this." The room began to fill with executives and board members. Jake felt his heart rate increase as he recognized faces he normally sat alongside in meetings. He tugged at his collar, suddenly aware of how easily his disguise could fall apart. As Mia began her presentation, Jake manned the computer, ready to demonstrate their prototype. He watched with pride as Mia eloquently explained the importance of digital inclusion and the potential impact of their project. "And now," Mia said, turning to Jake, "my colleague will demonstrate the platform we've developed." Jake stepped forward, launching into a demonstration of the user-friendly interface they had created. As he spoke, he could see the executives leaning forward, their interest piqued. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the room cut through the presentation. "Excuse me, but who exactly are you?" Jake froze, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He turned to see one of the senior VPs, someone he had worked closely with for years, staring at him with a puzzled expression. "I'm Jake Thompson," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm an intern working with Mia on this project." The VP shook his head. "No, I know I've seen you before. You look just like..." His eyes widened with sudden recognition. "Oh my God, Jake? Jake Thornton?" The room erupted into murmurs of confusion. Mia turned to Jake, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. "What's going on?" Jake felt the world closing in around him. He looked at Mia, seeing the hurt and betrayal dawning in her eyes. In that moment, he knew there was only one thing he could do. "Yes," he said, his voice ringing out clearly in the now silent room. "I am Jake Thornton." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could see the range of emotions playing across Mia's face: confusion, anger, disappointment. "I don't understand," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you? How could you?" Jake took a deep breath. "I wanted to understand the company from a different perspective, to see what life was like for our employees, to understand the challenges they face. I never expected..." He trailed off, looking at Mia. "I never expected to find something so much more important." One of the board members spoke up. "So this whole project, this presentation, it was all just some sort of experiment?" "No," Jake said firmly. "This project is real. Its importance is real. Mia's vision is real. I may have started this journey under false pretenses, but everything we've worked for, everything we've built, that's all genuine." He turned to Mia, who was staring at him with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Mia, I'm sorry. I know I've betrayed your trust, but please believe me when I say that my commitment to this project and my belief in you is absolutely real." Mia shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Without another word, she turned and rushed out of the room. Jake moved to follow her, but was stopped by a barrage of questions from the stunned executives. He answered them mechanically, his mind still on Mia and the hurt he had seen in her eyes. As the meeting broke up in confusion, Jake finally managed to escape. He searched the building for Mia, eventually finding her in a small break room, her face in her hands. "Mia," he said softly, "please, let me explain." She looked up at him, her eyes red. "Explain what, Jake? Or is that even your real name? How you lied to me for months. How you made me believe you were someone you're not." "My name is Jake," he said. "That much is true. And everything I've said about believing in this project, about wanting to make a difference, that's all true too." Mia stood up, anger replacing her sadness. "But you're the CEO, Jake. You've had the power to make these changes all along. Instead, you chose to play dress-up and pretend to be one of us. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Jake felt the full weight of his actions crashing down on him. "I know I've hurt you, Mia. I never meant for any of this to happen. I started this thinking I would learn about the company, but instead, I learned about myself. You showed me what really matters." Mia shook her head, moving towards the door. "I need time to process this. I can't even look at you right now." As she left, Jake slumped against the wall, the realization of what he had lost hitting him full force. He had set out to understand his company better, but in the process, he had found something far more valuable, and now he might have lost it forever. The revelation was complete, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. The days following the revelation were chaotic for TechSphere. News of Jake's undercover stint spread through the company like wildfire, leaving confusion and mixed reactions in its wake. Some employees found it admirable that the CEO would go to such lengths to understand their experiences, while others felt betrayed and manipulated. For Jake, the aftermath was a whirlwind of damage control. He spent hours in meetings with the board, explaining his actions and trying to salvage the digital inclusion project. But his mind was constantly on Mia, who had been conspicuously absent since the day of the presentation. After a week of unanswered calls and messages, Jake finally received a terse email from Mia. "Meet me at the cafe where we used to talk, 7 p.m. tonight." Jake arrived early, his stomach in knots. When Mia walked in, he was struck by how tired she looked. The fire he had grown to admire in her eyes seemed dimmed. "Mia," he began as she sat down, "I can't tell you how sorry I am." "Save it, Jake," Mia cut him off. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because, despite everything, I still believe in the project. And as much as I hate to admit it, we need your support to make it happen." Jake felt a glimmer of hope. "Of course, I'm fully committed to seeing this through. Whatever resources you need." "Stop," Mia said, holding up a hand. "This isn't about throwing money at the problem. This is about integrity. You lied to me, Jake. You lied to everyone. How can I trust anything you say now?" Jake leaned back, feeling the weight of her words. "You're right. I betrayed your trust, and I know that's not something I can easily regain. But Mia, you have to believe me when I say that my feelings for you, my belief in this project, none of that was a lie." Mia's expression softened slightly, but the hurt was still evident in her eyes. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you had the power to make these changes all along. Instead, you chose to play act as someone you're not. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? How it makes all of us feel?" Jake nodded slowly. "I understand now. I thought I needed to see things from a different perspective, but I realized I was just running away from my responsibilities. I should have been using my position to effect change, not pretending to be powerless." "Exactly," Mia said. "And now, even if the project goes forward, how can I be sure it's not just because you feel guilty? How can I know you truly believe in it?" Jake leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because you changed me, Mia. Working alongside you, seeing your passion, your dedication, it opened my eyes to what really matters. I'm not the same person I was when I started this." Mia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I want to believe you, Jake, but right now, I just can't. I need time." As she stood to leave, Jake felt a sense of desperation. "What can I do, Mia? How can I make this right?" Mia paused, looking back at him. "Prove it. Not with words, not with grand gestures, but with consistent action. Show me, show all of us, that you're truly committed to making a difference." After Mia left, Jake sat alone in the cafe, feeling more lost than he ever had as a supposed intern. He had gained insights into his company and himself, but at what cost? He had lost the trust of the woman he had grown to care for deeply, and potentially damaged the very project he had come to believe in. Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into his work with a new sense of purpose. He initiated a complete review of TechSphere's corporate social responsibility policies, personally championed the digital inclusion project in board meetings, and began a series of town hall meetings with employees at all levels of the company. But despite his efforts, He could feel the undercurrent of mistrust that now ran through the company. Employees were more guarded around him. Conversations would stop when he entered a room. The open, collaborative atmosphere he had experienced as an intern seemed like a distant memory. Mia remained professional but distant, focusing solely on the project and avoiding any personal interactions with Jake. Each time he saw her, Jake felt a pang of regret for the connection they had lost. As the days turned into weeks, Jake found himself grappling with a deep sense of disillusionment. He had set out to understand his company better, to become a more effective leader. Instead, he had damaged relationships, eroded trust, and potentially jeopardized the very project he had come to believe in so passionately. Jake realized that the road to redemption would be long and difficult. He had learned valuable lessons, but the price had been high. Now he faced the challenge of rebuilding trust, not just with Mia, but with his entire company. And as he sat in his office, looking out over the city, Jake wondered if he would ever be able to fully repair the damage his deception had caused. In the weeks following Jake's revelation, Mia found herself in a constant state of emotional turmoil. The betrayal she felt was compounded by the frustration of seeing the digital inclusion project, her life's work, suddenly thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Despite her personal feelings towards Jake, Mia was determined not to let the controversy derail the project. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, often staying late at the office to refine proposals and crunch numbers. One evening, as Mia was preparing for a crucial presentation to the board, she encountered unexpected resistance from her team. "I don't see why we're pushing so hard for this," said Tom, one of the senior developers. "It's pretty clear the only reason it's getting any traction is because of Jake's guilt." Mia felt her temper flare. This project was important long before Jake got involved. Its value hasn't changed just because of his actions. Another team member, Sarah, spoke up hesitantly. "But Mia, can we trust that the support will continue once the dust settles? What if this is all just for show?" Mia took a deep breath, trying to quell her rising frustration. "I understand your concerns, but we can't let what happened affect our commitment to this project. People are counting on us." As she looked around the room, Mia could see the doubt in her team's eyes. The unity and passion that had driven them before seemed to have evaporated, replaced by skepticism and uncertainty. Pushing aside her own doubts, Mia pressed on with the preparations. The next day, she stood before the board, acutely aware of Jake's presence at the head of the table. "The Digital Inclusion Initiative isn't just about corporate social responsibility," Mia began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It's about creating real, measurable impact in communities that have been left behind by the digital revolution." As she delved into the details of the project, Mia could feel the weight of the board's scrutiny. She noticed sideways glances between members, whispered comments she couldn't quite hear. When she finished her presentation, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Finally, one of the board members spoke up. "While the project seems well-intentioned, we have to consider the bottom line. How does this benefit TechSphere financially?" Mia felt a surge of frustration. This was the same short-sighted thinking she had been fighting against from the beginning. Before she could respond, Jake's voice cut through the tension. "If I may," he said, standing up. "This project isn't just about immediate financial gain. It's about expanding our user base, improving our public image, and most importantly, doing the right thing. Isn't that what TechSphere should stand for?" Mia felt a confusing mix of gratitude for Jake's support and resentment that his words seemed to carry more weight than hers ever had. After the meeting, as Mia was gathering her materials, Jake approached her. "That was a great presentation, Mia. I think we really made some headway." Mia stiffened. "We? I've been fighting for this project long before you decided to play intern, Jake." Jake's face fell. "I know, and I'm trying to make up for that. I meant what I said in there. I believe in this project, in your vision." Mia sighed, the fight draining out of her. "That's the problem, Jake. I don't know if I can believe you. Any of this could just be you trying to save face." As she walked away, Mia felt the full weight of her struggle. She was fighting not just for her project, but against the doubt and mistrust that had infected her team, against a board that still didn't seem to understand the importance of what they were trying to achieve, and against her own conflicted feelings about Jake. That night, as Mia sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by project notes and presentations, she found herself questioning everything. Was she fighting a losing battle? Had Jake's deception poisoned any chance of the project succeeding? She thought about her grandmother, about the battles she had fought. "The fight isn't over," she had said. "It's just changed battlegrounds." Mia realized that this was her battleground now. Not just for digital inclusion, but for integrity, for trust, for doing what was right, even when it was hard. With renewed determination, Mia began to formulate a new strategy. She would push forward with the project, with or without Jake's support. She would rebuild trust with her team, address the board's concerns head-on, and find a way to make them see the true value of what they were trying to achieve. As she worked late into the night, Mia knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was prepared to fight, not just for her project, but for everything it represented. The struggle was far from over, but Mia was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the months following the revelation of his true identity, Jake found himself grappling with the consequences of his actions. The trust he had built as an intern was shattered, and he was now viewed with suspicion by many of his employees. The weight of his deception hung heavy on his shoulders, and he knew that simply returning to his old way of running the company was no longer an option. One morning, as Jake sat in his office staring out at the city skyline, he received a call from Frank, his mentor. "Jake, we need to talk," Frank said, his voice serious. "Meet me at the park in an hour." When Jake arrived at the park, he found Frank sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. The older man looked up as Jake approached, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Jake," Frank said, gesturing to the empty space beside him. "Tell me, what have you learned from all this?" Jake sighed heavily. "I've learned that I was more disconnected from my company and its people than I ever realized. I've learned that there are issues, important issues, that I've been overlooking for years. And I've learned that trust, once broken, is incredibly hard to rebuild." Frank nodded slowly. "And what are you going to do about it?" Jake hesitated. I don't know. I've been trying to push forward with Mia's project, to show everyone that I'm committed to change, but it feels like everything I do is viewed with suspicion." Frank turned to face Jake, his eyes sharp. "That's because you're still thinking like the old Jake. You're trying to fix this from the top down, throwing your weight around as CEO. But that's not what's needed here." "Then what is?" Jake asked, frustration evident in his voice. "A complete transformation," Frank replied, "not just in your actions, but in your entire approach to leadership. You've seen the company from the bottom up. Use that knowledge. Make real systemic changes." Over the next few weeks, Jake took Frank's words to heart. He began by restructuring the company's decision-making processes, creating channels for ideas and feedback to flow more freely from all levels of the organization. He implemented a new profit-sharing program that would benefit all employees, not just executives. But perhaps most importantly, Jake started to change the way he interacted with his employees. He began spending time in different departments, not as a disguised intern, but as a leader truly interested in understanding and addressing the challenges his workers faced. One day, as Jake was leaving the IT department after a particularly insightful conversation with a junior developer, he ran into Mia in the hallway. "Jake," she said, surprise evident in her voice, "what are you doing down here?" I'm trying to understand, Jake replied honestly. Really understand this time. No disguises, no deception, just listening and learning. Mia studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. And what have you learned? That I have a lot more to learn, Jake said with a rueful smile. And that the people in this company have incredible ideas and insights that I've been missing out on for years. Mia nodded slowly. It's a start, she said, before continuing on her way. As the weeks turned into months, Jake's transformation began to have a visible impact on TechSphere. The atmosphere in the company started to shift. Employees began to speak more freely, share ideas more readily. The Digital Inclusion Project, along with several other initiatives aimed at social responsibility, gained momentum. Jake found himself working longer hours than he ever had as CEO, but for the first time in years, he felt truly energized by his work. He was no longer just a figurehead at the top of a corporate structure, but an active participant in shaping the company's future. One evening, as Jake was leaving the office, he found Mia waiting by the elevator. I've been watching what you've been doing, she said, as they stepped into the elevator together. It's impressive. Jake felt a surge of hope at her words. Thank you, he said sincerely. I'm trying to become the kind of leader this company deserves, the kind of person who deserves your trust. Mia was quiet for a moment. Trust takes time to rebuild, Jake, but I think you're on the right path. As the elevator doors opened and Mia stepped out, Jake felt a sense of cautious optimism. He knew his transformation was far from complete, and that he had a long way to go to fully regain the trust of Mia and his employees. But for the first time since his deception had been revealed, he felt like he was truly moving in the right direction. Jake's transformation wasn't just about changing his leadership style or implementing new policies. It was about fundamentally reshaping his understanding of his role as CEO and his responsibility to his employees and society at large. As he walked out of the TechSphere building that night, Jake knew that his journey was far from over, but he was committed to seeing it through, no matter where it might lead. 6 months after Jake's revelation, TechSphere was hosting a major fundraising event for the Digital Inclusion Project. The grand ballroom of a luxurious hotel was filled with investors, tech industry leaders, and social activists, all gathered to hear about the initiative that had become the talk of the tech world. Mia stood nervously backstage, reviewing her notes one last time. Despite the progress they'd made, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything could still fall apart at any moment. Jake approached her, looking uncharacteristically anxious himself. Are you ready? He asked. Mia nodded, taking a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. Let's hope this works. As Mia took the stage, Jake slipped quietly into the audience. He watched as she began her presentation, eloquently explaining the importance of bridging the digital divide and the potential impact of their project. And now, Mia said, her voice strong and clear, I'm thrilled to announce that we've received an anonymous donation that will allow us to expand our initiative to 50 additional communities across the country. A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Jake watched Mia's face, seeing the genuine surprise and joy there. He had arranged the donation in secret, wanting the project to succeed on its own merits rather than because of his influence. As Mia continued her speech, becoming more impassioned, Jake felt a mix of pride and regret. Pride in how far they'd come, and regret for the deception that had started it all. While we're grateful for this generous donation, Mia was saying, I can't help but feel frustrated that it takes anonymous philanthropy to address issues that should be a priority for the entire tech industry. For too long, we've allowed the digital divide to widen, focusing on products for the elite while ignoring those left behind. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the weight of her words. He knew she was right, and that his own past actions had contributed to the problem. As Mia concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, Jake made his way backstage. He found her surrounded by well-wishers, her eyes shining with excitement. "Mia," he said as the crowd dispersed, "that was incredible. You really moved people out there." Mia smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given him in months. "Thanks, Jake. I still can't believe that donation. It's going to change everything." Jake took a deep breath, knowing it was time to come clean. "About that donation, Mia, there's something I need to tell you." Before he could continue, they were interrupted by a commotion near the stage. A group of protesters had managed to get into the event, carrying signs denouncing tech companies for their role in increasing inequality. As security moved to intercept them, one of the protesters broke through, rushing towards Mia. "You're just as bad as the rest of them," he shouted, "pretending to care while you line your pockets." Without thinking, Jake stepped in front of Mia, shielding her from the angry protester. In the scuffle that followed, Jake was knocked to the ground, hitting his head on the edge of the stage. Everything went black for a moment. When Jake opened his eyes, he found himself lying in a hospital bed, with Mia sitting beside him, concern etched on her face. "Jake, can you hear me?" she asked, leaning forward. Jake blinked, trying to focus. "Mia, what happened?" "You hit your head pretty hard," she explained. "The doctor said you might be a bit confused for a while." As Jake's vision cleared, he noticed something odd. Mia was wearing a TechSphere employee badge, but it identified her as Mia Thornton, co-CEO. "Mia," Jake said slowly, "why does your badge say co-CEO?" Mia's brow furrowed in concern. "Because that's what I am, Jake. We've been running TechSphere together for the past 5 years, ever since we got married." Jake's mind reeled. Married? Co-CEOs? None of this made sense. "But the internship, the deception, the digital inclusion project," Jake stammered. Mia's expression softened with understanding. "Oh, Jake, that was all years ago. Don't you remember? After everything that happened, we worked together to transform TechSphere. The digital inclusion project was just the beginning. We've completely restructured the company to prioritize social responsibility alongside innovation." As Mia continued to explain, filling in the gaps of Jake's missing memories, he felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Relief that his deception hadn't ruined everything. Joy at the realization that he and Mia had found a way forward together. And a deep sense of satisfaction that they had managed to create real, lasting change. "I'm sorry," Jake said, reaching for Mia's hand. "I guess that knock on the head scrambled things up a bit." Mia squeezed his hand, smiling warmly. "It's okay. Just focus on getting better. We've got a company to run and a world to change, remember?" As Jake lay there, holding Mia's hand and processing this unexpected turn of events, he realized that sometimes reality could be even more surprising and rewarding than fiction. The journey had been long and difficult, but the destination was better than he could have ever imagined.